So what constitutes invitation in a spiritual sense? I mean, that's what we're here for, right? Or at least some of us are, to look at life today at invitation with a view of the spiritual presence, however we define that. How does the Spirit invite us? How do we invite it? Where do we find it? Do we ever consciously look at the invitations that are all around us? Today's the fall equinox. Day and night have reached a place of balance. In ancient traditions, it's called Meben. It celebrates the harvest and the sharing of harvest. The earth is preparing for a rest. Bonfires remind us of transformation and the rhythm of constant change. The trees will soon remind us that sometimes it's healthy to let go. Today, I think that we, as a society, have lost a lot when we disconnected from nature's rhythms and have insulated ourselves to a great extent. But still, nature calls us, invites us, at least it calls me. And the internet is full of guided meditations from yoga and other traditions, full of nature sounds. And all of camp, wherever you go to camp, is in the woods, away. Nature bathing is a thing in the woods. For me, I hear the call of the ocean down in the deepest depths of my soul. It calls to me, it invites over and over. And when I say yes to being fully present to it versus taking a fast walk with my cell phone, when I respond with yes to that call, like when I'm troubled, it's the easiest place for me to turn over all that I can no longer carry myself. When I open myself to the kind of unconditional love that will accept all I am and all that I have to give it, I believe I'm met. It's almost a conversation. No, it is a conversation of my deepest self with the vastness of the world, words unspoken and unneeded. Maybe you hear this call in the sacred room full of kids and grandkids and maybe great-grandchildren as your mind and your vision go soft for a moment of deep joy and gratefulness. Where do you find these moments of connection to spirit in or outside yourself? I'm going to oversimplify here for a minute. In Buddhism, generally, people go deep inside to find the expansiveness. And in many of the Abrahamic faiths, one looks for the source outside oneself. In pagan practice, it's nature that teaches. And it may be different for all of us, and it's not really a strict binary either or in any way. Sometimes it's just easier to talk of things that way. So what is it for you? If you reach toward the spirit from deep inside, we're going to breathe together for a moment. If you tend to reach for spirit by going deep inside, maybe wrap yourself up in a hug for a second. Maybe symbolize that however you symbolize it for yourself. If you find expansiveness outside, maybe you can symbolize that like this or with your palms extended in some way. However you might physically represent the place where you connect to your own spirituality, let's be physically present to ourselves in some way with some level of vulnerability, because others can see you, and open to the expansiveness for a minute and breathe. There is an open invitation, and if we can touch it, it's always calling us to go there. Thank you for that. We're all welcome here in our diverse practices, and yet there seems a universal call, right? To spirit, to the spiritual. Do we say yes? Can we hear it? Now, the world is full of invitations, not all of them spiritual. It seems that everywhere, everything, including our own minds and bodies, are always talking to us with various amounts of enthusiasm, asking for something. I was trying to work all this out in my head, as I often do. I asked Eileen a question, poor woman, Eileen, my wife. I said, what is the difference, do you think, between invitation and request? And she immediately said, oh, they're pretty much the same thing. And we kept talking about it. She reminded me, though, how often an invitation is made using the request language. The pleasure of your presence is requested. It implies a social obligation or some other, usually more weighty or formal gathering, a celebration of life, the unveiling of a will, a wedding. It implies there's some gravity to the invitation that's been issued. Your yes is anticipated because why wouldn't you want to go? But there's no strong threat behind it. It's not a demand. There's not a significant consequence, except maybe the disapproval of Aunt Bertha. A good excuse is expected. You might send a card or a gift if you can't make it. And that's the end of that. You're probably forgiven. You still get invited to the next thing. Spiritual invitation is not really a request. It's more of an open-handed, vulnerable, constant drumbeat of invitation and presence. It waits for us, for our response, without penalty, but with the possibility of reward, the feeling of connection, of conversation, however you feel that. The current state of our nation right now features invitations to cast our votes from a place of fear, to believe that there are large groups of people who are so fundamentally different from ourselves that they want to destroy us. It's a motivation that works. However, it's not a spiritual invitation because it calls us to wall ourselves off. Later, the choir is going to sing the song.
Will.
Yeah, that's what he said. It's a moment, like I said, in the movie Frozen, when Elsa and Anna are greeted by the Northuldra as they near the tribe's home. With their presence, they were asking to come in. Songs of welcome used to be common things when we are more tribal people, and the songs said in some way, if you come in peace, then welcome to our domain. In Samoa, that song looks fierce, but it means the same thing, perhaps more strongly. If you come in peace, if you don't come in peace, we'll handle it. Welcome in. Either way, hospitality is an ancient rule because no one could travel any distance without the hospitality of strangers. The welcome in, the invitation that waited for you. The spiritual invitation was to love your neighbor, and it's impossible to love your neighbor unless you've actually talked to them, unless you've actually provided a moment of connection for them to see if they've been good guests or not. If we find they're not good guests, or there's not benefit or learning or a place to connect, honesty, distance may become necessary because we're all human. However, often it's the invitation of conversation that changes us. A yes to conversation. Yeah, my father-in-law is nearly an immovable Trump supporter, and he was visiting last week when the debate was going to happen. And we decided to peacefully watch the debate together. We invited each other. I asked questions. I learned more about what he heard and saw and what was important to him. And I heard him reflect later that something I discussed with him about the FCC and not regulating cable news that I think was productive. And we ended the intersection on still good terms. And I know he was thinking about what was said, gently with love, on that couch we shared. And I'm reflecting on how much he loves his daughter and on the silos that so many of us inhabit. A moment ago, John was reflecting on the willingness to enter conversation with the intent to listen to the revelations of others and to reveal ourselves to be mutually seen. And there's a mutual vulnerability in that, which is spiritual. This is a difficult and powerful yes to truly engage one another with openness, to give people, strangers, a chance. And so much of politics is arguing that we should never give any stranger a chance. I would argue that most of our mental and spiritual growth come from this kind of connection. It's not that I can't grow or learn spiritually from people just like me or from sitting at the ocean shore. I can. But at the end of it, I have only myself to push against and people with my same point of view. And sometimes only the ocean to play it a witness. We grow muscles of all types with resistance, spiritual muscles included, even if it's passive resistance. We learn when we entertain the questions of life. Conversations are sacred invitations, inviting transformation, and often that doesn't happen in a moment, but can happen with multiple encounters over time. A mutual spiritual invitation of conversation can help bridge differences. I was reading that in some Buddhist monasteries, when monks are in residence for long periods of time, they have one particular kind of spiritual invitation, and it carries a particular wording and has a particular ritual, because whenever groups are all together and mostly the same for a very long time, stuff comes up. When all have gathered, the community is gathered, one of the monks who selected for that day rises and said, "Friends, I invite the community, with regard to what you have seen or heard or suspected, may you speak to me out of sympathy. And if I can see the offense, I will make amends." In close quarters, they commit to having nothing unresolved between them and to discuss the places of friction or difficulty. I love that. A spiritual invitation. Listen to this poem by a Raya mountain dreamer called The Invitation. It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for. And if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. Doesn't interest me how old you are. I want to know if you will risk looking like a fool for love, for your dream, for the adventure of being alive. Doesn't interest me which planets are squaring your moon. I want to know if you've ever touched the center of your own sorrow, if you've been opened by life's betrayals, or have become shriveled and closed for fear of further pain. I want to know if you could sit with pain, your own and mine, without moving to hide it, or fake it, or fix it. I want to know if you could be with joy, mine or your own, if you can dance with wildness and let ecstasy fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes without cautioning us to be careful. Be realistic. Remember the limitations of being human. Doesn't interest me if the story you're telling me is true. I want to know if you can disappoint another and be true to yourself. If you can bear the accusation of betrayal and not betray your own soul. If you could be faithless and therefore trustworthy. I want to know if you can see beauty, even when it's not pretty every day. And if you can source your own life from its presence. I want to know if you can live with failure, yours and mine, and still stand at the edge of the lake and shout to the sliver of the moon, yes. It doesn't interest me where you live or how much money you have. I want to know if you can get up after a night of grief and despair, weary and bruised to the bone, and do what needs to be done for the children. Doesn't interest me who you know or how you came to be here. I want to know if you will stand in the center of the fire with me and not shrink back. Doesn't interest me where or what or with whom you've studied. I want to know what sustains you from the inside when all else falls away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments. So what sets spiritual invitation apart? This willingness to know one another. The invitation that comes to us from a great expanse inside or outside ourselves, open-handed, a constant drumbeat that we can reach back for, waiting for us without penalty, but with possibility of great reward and connection to what is beyond our true knowing. It can strengthen us. And the only way on earth to do this, one of the best ways, one of the only ways, is the invitation to each other, to engage real conversation, to see each other, conversations we can enter that benefit all the involved parts. If it doesn't wall itself off, it's vulnerable, it's open, it seeks connection, it leads to growth and learning. And I believe these invitations are persistent, all around us, every day. Invitations in many places and ways, and we choose our engagement. As John said, the poet David White is said to see reality itself as conversation, and perhaps it is. Our enlightenment, our ahas of learning can come from deep within or from somewhere without, but life is certainly about the obligation to engage.